Today we're talking about a very popular practice in community engagement. It was the first training I ever formally received, and it still remains the number one request that I get as a facilitator from teams looking to engage their community and build healthy partnerships. Today we're talking about community cafes. So, what is a community cafe? At its basis, cafe conversations, not yet community cafes, is a liberating structure. It's primarily used for community engagement, strategic planning, or problem solving. Now, it fundamentally does two things. The first, being my favorite, is that it levels the playing field. It allows all of the participants to engage. It's accessible because it's not requiring people to be experts in subjects that they're not. It invites folks to get engaged by their lived experience and what they already know. The second thing that it does is that it eliminates the opportunity for conflict and argument, because the structure in and of itself is built around active listening and contribution, not debate and decision making. So the basic structure for hosting a cafe conversation is that it happens in small groups. There can be many attendees, but you don't want people sitting in groups larger than 4 to 5. Also, the staging of the chairs and or the tables is typically done in a round table seating. That way everyone can see each other. You also want to have rounds of conversations. So there's a set time, maybe there's a talking stick or a talking object, and the questions or prompts are given only a certain amount of time for everybody to be responsive to before it's time to move back in another feedback loop. Active listening and uninterrupted talking are a part of some of the rounds, but you'll also have some rounds where lively, engaging conversation can happen. There's also the need to have small group takeaways. So we're set up in small groups for a reason. After the rounds of active listening and lively conversation, it's important that that small group understand they're responsible for capturing their notes and their takeaways, because we're going to open up to the whole group and hear back from each of the small groups. And then the most important part, I would say, is that there needs to be a whole group dialogue and or consensus, or the ability to make a connection from what each of the small groups are saying. All right, so let's talk about adaptations, the things that are going to take your cafe conversation and transform them into a community cafe. The first one is critical, super important. I believe if you're going to have an effective community cafe, you have to think politically. You have to build allyship. If you're doing any form of adaptive work, and community engagement, strategic planning, problem solving, that's all adaptive. Adaptive meaning that the nature of the problem is complex and it requires diverse thinking, multiple voices, and more learning. If you're doing adaptive work, you need partnership. You do not want to be left out there hanging, because you're challenging people. When you point out the disparity between their values, what they say they believe, and how they're actually showing up, you're not going to be everyone's best friend. And so it's important to make sure that you are holding yourself accountable with diverse thinking, but that you're also not the only one pushing for this social change. So if you are leading strategic planning, you're going to want a design team, people that come from the staff, that come from the leadership, executive leadership. You're going to want to have a nice collective group of people that are representative of the team and or the organization that the strategic planning is happening for. If you're doing problem solving, who's at the center of the impact of that challenge? That's who you should be partnering with. When you're doing community engagement, you should have representation of the specific community that you're trying to engage. Don't go in like a savior. Don't go in with your assumptions and your bias, which we all have, and try to fix a problem that you're not a part of. Have representation, willing representation from the community that you specifically want to engage. When you create your partnerships, there are specific ways that they can engage, because you're calling on volunteers, you're calling on the willing, and so you have to be ready to meet them where they're at. Not everyone's going to have the highest level of confidence being in front of people and speaking. You have to work with the different skill sets and gifts that people are bringing to the table. So there's multiple ways folks can engage. And what I like to do is allow people to kind of self-select. They can do any or all of it, is how I like to put it. So the forms of engagement for your allies or your partners is that they can co-create. They can help you think about the agenda. They can help you think about the environment. They can help you think about what you want the experience and the outcomes to actually be. So they're there pretty much from the beginning, responding to things that you've already outlined, right? You can have your partner show up as connectors, which means that they maybe can hear you out and appreciate what you're doing, but they can see that they're not the right partner for you, or they don't have the capacity for it. Before you let people walk away and leave a no as a no, invite them to think about who else from their community or who else from the team, who else can they think about that would be a valuable contributor or partner for what you're trying to do. And that makes them a valuable connector. And then another way people can engage is in co-facilitation. This one seems a bit obvious, but it's also the hardest one to get people to engage with you around, because facilitation is not really easy, right? Getting in front of people and talking is not everybody's cup of tea. And so while co-facilitation is great, this is one of the more challenging ways for your partners to engage. An easier way to step into co-facilitation is to invite people to be table hosts. If you are in small groups and you have specific questions and you want to make sure people are following the rules and being active listeners, it's very helpful to have table group hosts that are familiar with what you're doing. They know what the questions are, they know what's supposed to be happening, and now they are placed at each of the small groups to help kind of control what's happening at those tables. So that's a way your partners can engage. They can also be on-site volunteers. When you are actually set up and having the community cafe, it's nice to have a full team that's helping build the hospitality, right? So greeters and people who are directing and showing people where to go and where to be, friendly faces, helping people get to their food, whatever that's supposed to look like. But having a hosting team is a way people can engage. And then recruiters. Recruiters are a little bit different from connectors, because connectors are in the beginning, right? They hear what you're saying, they can appreciate that, but they can't participate, and so they connect you with someone else. A recruiter is someone who said yes in the beginning, they're part of the team, they know what the outcomes are, and now they're helping you recruit the right participants for the cafe. So they're kind of like your marketing team. And then last but not least, this rarely ever happens, but I think it's super critical. It's important to allow people to potentially engage as an active listener. You don't need more than maybe one or two of these people, but someone who understands and has informed the design process. They know what the outcome and the goals are, and they're going to be at the cafe to listen only, never to engage and be in conversation, likely not sitting at a small group table, but kind of off to the side, hanging around the back, and they're taking intentional notes based upon what you know your outcome or goal is for this community cafe. Often when we're having conversation, we get swept away in what we're hearing or what we're focusing on. We can definitely get distracted by what we're saying. If we're being a contributor or if we're talking, that means we're not actively listening. And so it's important to have someone who is not engaging in the conversation but can be listening the whole time to body language, to the culture that's being built, to the vibe that's being set, to even the bias that might come out of the main facilitator who could be guiding the conversation in a certain way, right? So you just want to have that person listening, taking notes, and ready to debrief after the cafe. Adaptation number 2, appreciative inquiry. Appreciative inquiry is a strength-based approach. It is a framework that outlines how to engage people based off of existing strengths. So there are 4 Ds in the process: discovery, dream, design, and destiny. With these 4 Ds, you essentially identify and explore what's working well, envision what could be, co-create new strategies, and implement for sustainability. The way it supports a community cafe is it provides an outline for the flow of the experience. You start in the discovery and you end in the destiny. It also informs the design of powerful questions, helping the experience be that much more accessible. Meaning that the first few rounds of conversations are going to be questions that are about discovery, what's working well. It's going to be about dreaming, envisioning what things would be like if X wasn't a problem. And as you move along, you're going to have questions in design. What can we do together? How are we building? What do we have, essentially? And then destiny is, what's the next step? What's the next conversation? Who's missing from the conversation so that we can create a strategic plan and implement well? How do we track our success so that we can have continuous improvement? Adaptation number 3 is a world cafe model. Essentially, this just means when it comes to the decor, you're making it as cafe-like as possible. So What does it look like to go to a coffee house when you're interested in studying or meeting with friends? Maybe there's jazz playing in the background. Maybe we're using cups and coffee mugs for holding our pens and the different tools that are at the table. Maybe you have a small plant on the table, or we're being creative with different tablecloths that we're using. What does it look like to create an ambiance where we feel like we're studying in a coffee house? We're just having conversation over pastries and lattes, right? Also, in addition to normal coffee house things, there are different modalities for engaging on the table. So you're including things like fidget toys and multiple different writing utensils, not just pens, but there's pencils, there's markers, there's color pencils. Maybe you have chart paper on the table, but you also have lined notebook paper and graphing paper, so that we're honoring who's ever sitting there and whatever ways they know how to show up. You're also thinking about things like cross-pollination. So earlier I mentioned that there are multiple rounds to a cafe conversation. Well, in a community cafe, depending on how dense and thick the conversation or how many people there are, you may want to mix it up by adding the element of cross-pollination, which means that in between rounds, people are getting up and they are moving and mixing with different table groups. So they're not sitting in the same chair having the same conversation with the same people. They're meeting everybody in the room. Or maybe there's a silent gallery walk where people get up from their tables, they go and read what notes people are taking and what other conversations the table groups are having, and they mark what resonates with them by sticker or star or circling something. This is what it means to cross-pollinate. So the World Cafe adds a little flavor and a little bit more to the experience for your participants. The fourth adaptation is a kid cafe. A kid cafe means that you're not just engaging with the adults, but you're engaging with the entire family unit. So whatever the objective or the goal of the community conversation is, we're also thinking about how we would engage the youth in that subject matter. And so while the adults are having a cafe, the youth are also in designated age-appropriate groups, and the conversation's been tailored to meet them where they're at. Likely when we're doing this, you want to engage, when we talk about partners and allies, you want to engage with people who are familiar with being educators of youth or youth mentors or coaches, and you want to make sure to do background checks and or get consent, the appropriate protocols for having youth in a space. Now, this adaptation number 5, I believe we're on, is super, super duper important. I think it's the deal breaker between effective community cafes and not so effective community cafes. I'll be the first to admit, relationships, community engagement, conversation, this is very hard to quantify and put in any tangible or evidential feedback, right? People want reports, people want results, and how do you say, well, we just had a really great conversation and expect people to be happy about that? We need to do a little bit more work when we're starting with conversations. Conversations are a powerful tool, but how do we make sure that we are extracting, or better yet, harvesting the brilliance, the richness, the things that feel significant and tangible from those conversations? We do that with a harvest. You want to make sure to have a strong facilitator. You want to make sure to have plenty of time for the harvest. This is not something that you want to skirt, and it will be tempting because small groups are easy. People are having those conversations by themselves. They seem to really engage, and it feels like your meeting's going well. But the harvest is when one person or two people are standing in front of a large group of people, and live in the moment, you're taking feedback from each of the small groups, charting it so that people can see it, so that you feel like you understand it and you have it. And then you don't just leave it there. You do not just leave it there. You don't just capture those notes and barely chicken scratch them on a chart paper and move on. You need to write legibly. You need to check that you have captured the thoughts and ideas appropriately, which is why it's so key to have the tables actually write out their own takeaways and then maybe present the takeaways. And so now we have multiple pieces of chart paper on the wall. But then after we've collected each of the small groups' feedback, it's time to draw the connection and or corporate consensus across the group. Now, mind you, community cafes aren't really designed or set up to make concrete decisions, but you still want to be able to identify what the next step is, or what those things that everyone would say they agree on. Like, that's definitely the challenge. This is definitely the direction we want to go, right? And so your facilitator needs to be listening for the natural crossroads and the connective tissues between ideas. And then what's even more important is being able to reflect back to the whole group after everything has been connected, everything has been collected, and say, so if we were speaking with one voice, or this is what I hear us saying, and you repeat it back. You repeat it back in some kind of summarized sentence about the sentiment or the ideas and or the hopes and or the solutions that the whole group is coming up with. And this gives them a chance to step into adaptation number 6, which is checking for understanding, getting closer to a consensus and giving the participants a chance to affirm what has actually been harvested. One of the ways I really enjoy doing this is using a tool called Gradients of Agreement, where you actually take a table that has a numbering from 1 to 10, and each of the numbers actually represent where someone might be in their processing, because processing looks different for all of us. So 1 is like, yes, absolutely, that's what we're saying, we agree with that, take that and run to the powers that be. 10 is like, no way, I'm not agreeing to this, I can't believe I came, this is not what I'm saying. And then you have everything in between. So people can actually just quickly choose a number for you to take a temperature as to where the group is in their affirmation or thumbs up back toward what you collected in the harvest. You want to make sure that you have a good idea of what you're walking away with before you walk away. So last but not least, when it comes to what a community cafe is, I think it's important to go over the supportive mindsets. This work that we're doing is extremely challenging, and some of the biggest barriers are unsupportive mindsets. It's just the beliefs that don't align with what it really takes to create social change. And this is not to point fingers at anybody else. Often this is work we have to do within ourselves. It's challenging, and there are real gaps between what we hope for and what we say we value, and then what feels easiest in terms of the way we show up and the way that we behave. So as an adaptive leader, I want to empower you to be thinking about your own countenance, your own frame of thinking, where your heart and mind is throughout the entire process, but also give you helpful mindsets to invite other people into so that they can be successful in their experience with you. So these mindsets would be, first, to suspend all judgment and lead with curiosity. This is difficult. Our biases go with us. They're the only filter and lens that we have to see this world through. But we can always pause long enough to listen and to ask questions rather than to come to a consensus and make judgment about others or even ourselves. So we lead with curiosity. Respect for one another is key. This is something that's often thrown out in spaces of strategic planning or collaboration or community engagement, and then people want to know what it looks like. So respect, I think, is to be patient, mindful not to shut others down with our body language or our tone. Whether or not your mouth is open, you are constantly communicating. So what does your face look like? What does your body look like? How are you breathing? What's your tone when you finally do get a chance to speak, right? So we need to be careful to just create a space of listening to understand, even if we're not the ones talking. Also, what does it look like to seek to understand rather than to persuade? That's the next mindset. The goal in community cafes is not to persuade or debate or to get someone on your side. Honestly, the diversity of thought and the more contribution that's possible, the more effective your cafe will be. So seek to understand rather than to persuade others to get on board with you. Another helpful mindset is honesty over transparency. This is something that you just want to be thinking about and want to be aware of. It's always appropriate to be honest, especially in community cafes when we're looking to design real solutions, right? You want to encourage yourself and you want to model and encourage other people to be honest, but transparency, not always appropriate, especially in a cafe. We want to make sure that we're not making people uncomfortable by going into information and context that's not relevant or necessary. When you're inviting people into these conversations, let them know there's a difference between honesty and transparency. It's always appropriate to be honest, not always wise to be transparent. Look for points points of connection and relatability. So when we're suspending judgment and when we are seeking to understand rather than persuade, we can be looking for the connections between what we hear people saying and how we believe and feel and operate. We have the ability to find what is the same between us rather than always looking for what's different. As the adaptive leader and designer and potentially facilitator of a community cafe, I'm going to encourage you not to be in a hurry. What happens is supposed to happen. You're centering your learning goal, not the success of a really great event, not the happiness of others. Whatever it is that puts you on this path of seeking out community cafes, that thing you need to learn, that space where you need to engage with other people's thinking, that's what needs to remain centered. So be careful not to be in a hurry and to be distracted by effectively making it through or successfully making it through your agenda. That's not the most important thing. Take your time, focus on getting the learning that you have set out to achieve. And last but not least is that the work is not simple, but your learning objective should be. You're taking one step. Okay, I see people overpromise and underdeliver every time, a lot of the time, on community cafes because they are trying to solve the world's problem or their challenge with a community cafe. That's impossible. A community cafe is one meeting. In most cases, it's your first opportunity to meet some of the people that you're talking with. So do not assume that you're going to get everything you need out of one community cafe. It will likely take many conversations. Community cafes may be one best practice connected to others that are going to help you achieve your goal. It's one meeting, a couple of hours with new people. Your learning objective for that evening should be simple. You're taking one step. Let's let it be in the right direction. Community cafes are a beautiful practice, but I also know them to be a lot of work, especially if you want to do it right. So if you're interested in hosting your own community cafe, but you feel you need a little bit more help, I get it. Feel free to connect with me. We can set up a one-on-one and I can help you determine what help looks like for you. Maybe you need someone to co-design the agendas with. Maybe you're looking for an experienced facilitator for that harvesting piece. Or maybe you just came out of a community cafe and you're trying to determine what your next steps are. Either way, I'm happy to meet you where you are. I also provide community cafe trainings for new groups that are looking to step into this and want to get it right from the very beginning. Reach out to me via email at tclark@rightstandingsolutions.com, or you can visit my webpage, rightstandingsolutions.com. Thank you for tuning into this video. I hope it was helpful, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye.